those of you who want extra content, there are 2 new videos on Patreon that you can go ahead and check out that I shared this week. If you sign up for the $5 tier, you'll get 4 extra videos a month. And they're ad-free. There's already a bunch of other videos and cases that I've shared, and you'll gain access to those as well. The link will be down below. If you don't care for extra content, but you'd like to check out my videos ad-free, please consider becoming a member. And for $2.99, you can access all my newer uploads ad-free. If there's one in particular that you want me to re-upload ad-free, and it's from years ago, just send me a message and I'll do that. Add it to the collection. Today, let's talk about the Amish killer. It's gonna take us all the way back to the 90s, actually, to Rockdale Township, which was a tiny area in the northwest corner of Pennsylvania, and with no more than about 1,000 residents at the time. Now, if you're not from the US, you probably are not familiar, but this old order Amish, it's very, it's most of the residents, or some of the residents, are part of it. But since then, or since March 18, 1993, much of the Amish community of Rockdale moved away and just kind of trying to escape the legacy of Ed Gingrich. Now let me tell you about Ed, who was born in 1963 in Norwich, just in Ontario, Canada. He was born into this old order Amish family. And the Amish way of life was kind of changing. They were slow to adopt modern technology, but they would eventually adapt under certain circumstances. For those of you who don't know, the Amish people believed in a simplistic, uncomplicated way of life. Simple clothing, more traditionalist, Swiss, German, and a Baptist Christian beliefs. Many of the modern things that most of us see as part of everyday life were not really allowed by the Amish. We're hardworking, that appreciated family time, face-to-face conversation, and whoever was not part of the Amish, or whoever was not Amish, was referred to as, quote, English, regardless of their actual ethnicity. Now Ed, as a teenage boy, worked in his father's wood shop. He would operate simple machines that the Amish allowed themselves. is about more complicated machinery and devices that were not allowed in the Amish faith. He didn't care for the simple life, so he grew defiant and rebellious. He complained about having to constantly do chores, and he was not interested in going to church. Most Amish children would marry by their late teens, but Ed had not found a match by his early 20s. Bishop Rudy Settler, who was the leader of the community, decided that he had a solution. His niece, Katie Shetler, and he thought it was going to be a perfect match. The bishop and the members of the community believed that Katie would be a good influence for this guy who was really a rebel. And Katie saw potential in Ed. She was sure she could change his ways, and she actually fell in love with him. Ed was not so sure about the relationship, but the bishop pushed the couple into marriage. However, most people didn't trust Ed. They approved this relationship but did not trust him. They couldn't believe that Katie was going to be able to bring this guy back to the original beliefs, or their Amish ways. But they got married on December 2nd, 1986. They had an Amish ceremony with plain clothes and no wedding rings. 10 months later, they had their first child, Danny. But Ed was still uninterested in family or being the head of the household. Ed's work provided him with brief contact with the, quote, English people from outside the community. Through this guy, Dave Lindsay, he learned about the fascinating world outside of his tiny perspective. Dave was an evangelical Christian and told Ed stories of Satan and hell. Dave explained to Ed that if he continued to follow the Amish faith, he and his family would burn in hell for all eternity. Well, my friend Dave, your God must have been pretty, I don't know, not patient, I guess. Shortly after the birth of their son, Ed was kind of falling into depression. He stopped, speaking, and if he did, it was usually to whine or, kind of argue with his wife. And Katie often had a hard time getting him out of bed to go to work. So once Katie had enough, she went to her uncle and Bishop Shetler for help. The Amish people had very little experience with mental health issues, so it was hard to understand that he was depressed. To make things worse, even if they understood that depression was an illness, they didn't believe in modern medicine. And they believed that God alone would heal. Bishop Shetler, he presumed that Ed's problems were physical. So he took it to a chiropractor in nearby Cambridge Springs. He believed that by doing this he would purify his blood. He prescribed scalp massages and have him eat blackstrap molasses. For somebody who is depressed, this is a kind of an unconventional treatment, but that's what he got. And 3 more years passed by. They had another son, Enos, and a daughter, Mary. But he was even more depressed. And he was also very angry. So angry that he would start abusing his wife, and she would have to hide her bruises. At work, Ed would spend more time with people from outside the Amish community, and he drifted further and further away from the community. Eventually, he confided to Katie that he had doubts about the Amish faith, and that he was afraid that he and his family were going to hell. In the spring of 1982, Katie and Ed's brother, Hadley, and Joe looked for help for Ed because he was hallucinating at that time, so they looked for professional help. Ed would tell his wife that he saw a giant rabbit. He would howl like a wolf and spit on the ceiling, claiming there were eyes all over him watching. He began ranting that God and Satan were fighting for his soul, and he jumped out of their second-story house window and ran down the dirt road. Although it was not the Amish way, they had to call 911 twice and had him hospitalized. In one occasion, it took 7 guys to hold him down and hog-tie him in order to get him to the hospital. He would smash medical equipment. But eventually he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and he was given medicine to calm him. Many people in the Amish community believed that he was paying the price for his sinful ways and that God was actually punishing him. He took the medicine, but he always complained about the side effects. Not able to think straight. So the bishop and the elders of the community made a decision to let him stop taking the medicine. But the hallucinations and voices in his head started again. On March 18, 1993, he threatened to take his own life. He was saying that Satan was trying to steal his soul, and that he thought Katie was the devil. That night there was a wedding planned, was upset because Katie didn't want him to attend. Ed asked an, quote, English neighbor to take him to the chiropractor once again. Early that evening, after the chiropractor visit, Ed woke up from a nap, walked into the kitchen, and punched Katie in the face in front of their 6-year-old son, Danny. Katie fell to the floor and yelled for Danny to run and get help. Danny ran over a mile to Ed's brother's house while Ed calmly walked out to the back porch and put on his work boots. Their other children, Mary and Enos, stayed in the room to witness the horror that was about to start. Ed's younger brother, Daniel, raced to the house on horseback, but when he opened the door, he saw Ed sitting on Katie's body with a look of insanity really on his face. Her face was, her head was a mush of skull and brains on the floor, and he had stomped her head into a pulp of nothingness. Daniel claimed that he saw the devil standing next to his brother and was scared for his own life. So he ran down the road to a non-Amish neighbor to call 911. Police arrived at dusk to find Ed covered in blood, walking calmly down Sturgis Road. He was carrying his daughter Mary in one arm, and his son, Enos, was walking by his side, holding his hand. He was taken immediately into custody. When police entered the house, they realized that Ed had disemboweled her while his brother ran for help. Her torso was cut from her throat to just below her navel, and all of her organs had been piled to the side of her body. He had cut her like a hunter would cut a deer. There was even this commentary that said that EMT workers just couldn't even recognize the body as a body. It was just, I'm gagging over here, okay? For real. So later that night, they started interviewing Ed, and Ed would say some stuff like, I'm just like in a tunnel. They just wanted to know what happened, why he did what he did. He would say things like, I think we could still save her. I mean, and even after the police were confirming that she was actually dead and she was, not going to come back to life, then he would say something that her death was for his gain. A gain for the people, not just his religion. Detectives tried to have him say why he had to do what he did. Why he took the time to do that to her body. In the end, it was all about getting rid of the devil in her. They interviewed him for hours, but really what he'd say time he was aware that he had killed her, but other time he seemed to have no recollection of the night. Ed was the first Amish person to ever be charged with murder. But he was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, but mentally ill. That's how he was found. Had he been found guilty by reason of insanity, he could have been allowed indefinite hospitalization, but the conviction only carried a maximum of 5 years. He served his sentence in the State Correctional Institution in Mercer, Pennsylvania, and he was given credit for the time he had already served awaiting trial. After serving the full 5-year sentence, 34-year-old Ed was free. Because he was not found to be insane per se, his ongoing treatment was his own responsibility. And almost 60 members of the Brown Hill Amish community signed a petition requesting his permanent commitment to a mental hospital. But that didn't happen. They were terrified of Ed. Now, that is for the Brown Hill Amish community. But other Amish communities were happy to see him released and welcomed him. They believed that he was sorry for the things that he had done, and that he just needed to be forgiven, and he needed to repent for his sins. So he was actually accepted into an Amish mental health facility in Michigan. He then stopped taking his medication, so he was moved again to a psychiatric unit in Indiana where he could receive constant supervision. Now, throughout the years, he tried to reconcile with his children and family. In the year 2007, he returned to Crawford County and rented a house near the Brown Hill Amish community. He was still taking his meds now and seeing a specialist and a caseworker regularly. He reconciled with his 2 brothers and his 2 sons. Mary, however, lived with her grandparents and was forbidden from seeing her father. Word eventually got around that, Ed reconciled, which resulted in the shunning of his sons who had become teenagers. The shunning is a decision made by the church to exclude a person and cease interaction for not following the rules set by the church. Ed wanted to reconcile with his daughter. She was now 17 and looked very much like her mother. In April 2007, while she was riding in a buggy, Ed and his brothers abducted Mary and took her to a relative's home in the neighboring McKean County. The Browning community worried that Ed plotted to kill his daughter, but after spending 5 days with her father, she was returned. However, you can't do that, so he was arrested for the abduction and pleaded no contest. He was sentenced to 6 months of probation and fined $500. The next year, he was arrested again was caught deer hunting with a rifle. Because of his felony conviction, he couldn't own or use a firearm. He pled guilty and served 3 more months in jail. Although they loved their brothers, Ed's brothers, Joe and Adley, reconciled with the Brown Hill community. And the only way that they would accept him was if they stopped seeing Ed. After serving his time, Ed moved in with another cousin in another town. But it was a, quote, English neighborhood, and they protested, and he was asked to leave. Ed moved in with the attorney that represented him at trial, George and his wife Stephanie lived on a farm in Cambridge Springs. Ed worked on the farm and continued taking his medicine. But he eventually got depressed again. The homeowner said that he never had an episode while living with them, but that he was lethargic and really couldn't accept the fact that he had no contact with his family. On the morning of January 14, 2011, Ed went out to the barn to feed the horses. It took him 5 hours, so Stephanie went out to go check on him, and he was hanging from a rafter in the barn. In the dust on top of the bucket he had kicked out from underneath himself, he wrote, "Forgive me, please." Although the Amish community had shunned Ed, they forgave him in death. Katie's uncle preached at the funeral held at his brother's Adley's home. Amish people came from several states to attend. His body is buried next to his wife in the Gavov Amish cemetery. Now, I have to say that this is one of those cases that when I started researching it and I learned what he did to his wife, I thought, oh my goodness, this guy is a monster. And then it quickly changed to, oh my goodness, this guy is mentally ill and he needed help. I think that by him taking his own life, it proves once again how dangerous our minds are. How your brain can convince you that what you think is happening is actually happening, even though nobody else can see it. In this case, it's very, black or white kind of scenario, because he was part of this Amish community, which I think, regardless of what they believe and what they do and whatever, people that I've had contact with and are, Amish, sucks because of mental illness. It just breaks my heart to see that, mental illness is not accepted everywhere as something uncontrollable and in need of help. And this guy had a serious mental illness, and he just needed medicine. And when he took his medicine, he was still sad because his family was his number one priority, and that was the one thing he hurt the most with what he did. And no matter how much they would forgive him, it still is something terrible that he did. And he can't go back to that time with his wife and children, and what was done was done. Now, I mentioned to you guys recently that I had one of those anxiety episodes, and I was sharing in church with a small group in our church about the power that our brain has over us, and how easy it is for me to understand other people doing things while in that state. And although I never had an anxiety attack that was like, oh no, you need to do this or you need to do that, but your brain convinces you that what you're feeling is real, and what you're thinking, despite nobody else seeing it, you can see it clearly, and you're right and everyone else is wrong. So I was telling this story, or I guess this realization I got while I was going through that last episode, that I feel like a lot of things that are happening today is people with when they are confirmed that they had some kind of a mental illness, I am convinced that they are convinced that what they're doing is right in their mind, even though we all know that it's a terrible thing that they're doing. The power that your brain has over you to tell you to create a completely different reality in your mind, that it's not really what's going on, but you can see it that way, you feel it that way, you're sure that's what it is, really is, I think, the determining factor in some of these horrible cases. I mean, he believed that his wife was somehow possessed by the devil. He believed that, and that's why he acted on it. Is that an excuse for what he did? No. But I think it should be a cautionary tale for people that believe that mental illness, it's an option. You are depressed, well, shake it off. Shake off the sadness and be happy. Smile and be fine. That's not how it works. That's why there are two different words. One is sadness, and another one is depression. And they're not the same. Now, I'm not trying to put the blame on the wife or anybody, really. But I'm saying that if us, a society, and us regular people are not able to accept that mental illness is as real as physical illness, and if we don't work towards helping people that are suffering from it, if we play deaf, or if we play dumb to these things that they just need to shake off, then terrible things are going to continue to happen because they need help. this case, he played against Ed because all he needed was medicine. But by the time he got the medicine he needed, it was already too late. He had killed his wife, he had ruined his family, and that's all he cared about. Even though he was not into it in the beginning. People tell me all the time, well, if you say you don't want a family and then you want a family, and like in this case, are you a hypocrite, or are you lying, or are you lying when you said that in the first place? And all I'm gonna say is, we are people, and as a minute goes by, an hour, 2 hours, days, weeks, months, we grow, we change, we evolve. So it's normal to maybe not like something and then be the thing that you love the most. I was an indoor person all my life. You couldn't get me out of my house to save my life. And now I'm an outdoor person who hates to be inside. If I'm inside, I need to have the windows open, I need to have the door open, I need to be listening to what's going on outside. And maybe it's because I live in the country, but was I not myself when I was an indoor person and said that I didn't like to be outdoors? No, I was not lying at the time. That was the person that I was back then. But this is the person that I am today. And a lot happened in between then and now that made me who I am today. And in 20 years from now, if I'm lucky to still be around, I'll be a completely different person than I am today. That's called evolving, transforming, changing, growing. You don't have to say you're this and stick to it for the rest of your life. You're like this today in 2021 when you are X years old. But guess what? You're allowed to change your likings, your hobbies. You're allowed to change your mind politically, religiously. How did we become so judgy of each other? I still don't understand. But what I do understand is that people with mental illness need help. And that saying that depression is sadness is not helping anybody. Such a horrible case.